So if you were to explain the 2025 version of the 4% rule, how would you explain that?
For a person who is planning on 30-year retirement and withdrawing from an IRA account or something similar, that the worst case scenario would be 4.7%. Okay. Now, I compare that to the average for the last 100 years. It's over 7%. Believe it or not, the average and a retiree is able to take 7%. They haven't been able to do that except for a few months in the last 25, 30 years because the stock market's been so expensive. It would be a rule I would use very carefully because I don't think the historical circumstances that generated that rule apply to today. We're not as in dire a situation. And just hope we don't get a return to inflation. Keep an eye on the inflation and take out more than the 4.7%, maybe 5.25%, maybe 5.5%, and hope for better times.
Hey, Bill, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks. Glad to join you today.
Thank you so much for taking time with me. Would you mind just sharing a brief overview of your background?
I'm a retired financial advisor now about a dozen years. I started out, though, training to be an astronaut. I went to MIT to get an engineering degree. I wanted to do that whole Matt Damon thing on Mars.
Wow.
First one there, but that didn't work out. So I ended up joining my family's soft drink bottling business in New York, ran that for a number of years. And we sold that, moved to California, became a financial advisor, and things took off by themselves from there with this 4% rule. And then I retired about a dozen years ago, but I continue my research on the topic. I've written a book on it, which will be out later this year, and enjoying continuing to do this work.
I love that. Oh, I have so many questions on the retirement things. But before we get into that, was there a soda that you were
Oh, yeah.
bottling that we would be familiar with?
Which was 7 Up, which unfortunately
Oh,
has fallen on hard times since then. It's sad to see it. But we also had like Orange Crush and Perrier and A&W root beer. The business had been in our family 100 years at the time we sold it.
wow. That never came up in my research. So that is fascinating because I'm in Charlotte. So I'm in Dr. Pepper and Coca Cola land. Your 4% rule changed my life personally and is changing the lives of many of my clients and readers. I followed your 4% rule as soon as I learned about it. It really changed my mindset around wealth and retirement. And I just turned 40 this year and am on my path to early retirement thanks to
Yeah.
your work and your rule. And for those people who might not be familiar with the 4% rule, I would love to hear it from your own, from the mouth of the person who created it. What is the 4% rule and how did that come to be in your financial advising career?
It's really important to recognize in the beginning that it didn't start out as a rule at all. It was just simply a finding. I wrote a paper back in 1994, over 30 years ago, and I was trying to, for the first time, analyze for somebody who wanted to withdraw money from the retirement funds for 30 years. And if you look at the historical record, what was the worst case situation that would have encountered? In other words, what withdrawal rate would have worked for them and everyone else in history without
Mm.
exception? And in that paper, I came out with a number of 4.15%, which I didn't say was a rule, but shortly after that paper was published, people were starting to refer to the 4% rule. I guess they didn't like decimal points, but they took out a decimal point and made it a rule. And I've adopted it since. Subsequent research has become more sophisticated, and I've increased that to 4.7%. So you can say the 4.7% rule. But I just want to remind folks that particular withdrawal rate applied to only like one retiree out of the 400 I study over for the last 100 years. It's a worst case. Almost every other retiree would expect to do better than that. And in the current environment, it's certainly more than 4.7%.
That's so interesting that you just said that it's actually viewed as the worst case scenario. And a lot of people, when I teach them the 4% rule, their immediate mind goes to what they think is the worst case scenario. Because the questions I always get is, Bernadette, what about inflation? And what about the interest rates? And what about the current economy? And so, in your view, how has the rule held up in today's economic and market environment versus when you first wrote about it in 1994?
Yeah, the rule is actually based upon the person who retired in October of 1968. It turns out they were the ones who ran into the worst situations for a retiree. They ran into multiple bear markets, one after the other. And then they also encountered very high inflation for a decade of the 70s. When you get high inflation and you're adjusting your withdrawal rates each year, they go up very rapidly. So that was the worst case situation as it turned out. And since that time, we have not experienced circumstances equal to that, let alone worse than that. For now, at least, the rule has held up. It's still the worst case, but who knows what will come in the future? No one knows for
That's
sure.
That's true. When I talk about the 4% rule, a lot of people worry about rising inflation and maybe, like you said, potentially lower expected returns in the future because we don't know what's going to happen. There's also sometimes I get criticism around the increased longevity of people's lives that make it feel like, oh, the 4% rule might be outdated. So, what do you say to those critics who are trying to say treat it as a rule, which is interesting when you tell me that in the beginning, like you didn't call it a rule, it actually turned into a rule after people found out about your research.
It can be viewed as a rule, as a worst case scenario, as I mentioned. But because I study historical retirees, and over the last 100 years, you can imagine we've had all kinds of inflation, all kinds of recessions, all kinds of stock market booms and busts. So it's like that commercial for the tomato sauce. It's in there. The ingredients are in there. And even in today's environment where stocks are very expensive, and that's usually a negative for withdrawal rates, I still would recommend folks take out more than that 4.7%. We're just not facing situations dire as they did back in the 1970s, at least not yet.
What is up, y'all? I am Bernadette Joy, your money mentor and the founder and author of Crush Your Money Goals. And if you are here, it's probably because you are tired of being burned out and stressed out by your money situation, whether it is not having enough savings, not getting paid enough, not having enough in retirement. And so if you are tired of being tired, you're in the right place because I created a new resource guide for you. It's absolutely free, and you can go in there and find all the 25 different tools and resources. And you can find videos to watch, books to read, podcasts to listen to, articles, and so much more to help you on your money journey so you can stop being so stressed out and enjoy life instead. If you want to learn more, you can go ahead and sign up in the links on this page, and you'll immediately get access to the free guide so that you can start your money journey today.
Literally just took a deep breath myself as someone who is looking at early retirement and thinking that 4% was the max that I could take out. And you're saying actually it's okay to take out more than that. And your studies are showing now that it's like really 4.7%. Sometimes people have a hard time putting it into like practical application of how to use the rule if they're thinking through these
Yeah.
decisions right now. For example, in today's interest rate environment and with the market volatility in the last couple of months, for those who are in retirement right now, is the suggestion then to withdraw more or less than 4%? Is there still room to be optimistic?
That's an excellent question. And how much you withdraw depends upon a number of factors, and I've identified at least 8 of them, and they're in my book. When you ask a question about this, it's the answer is not necessarily a simple one. I know one of the biggest factors will be how long you plan to be retired. If you're retired 30 years, it's one number. If you're retired 50 years, it's another number. And I know there are a lot of folks who are looking to retire early, the FIRE group, and you have to look at it differently. Today, if a person was looking at just a conventional 30-year retirement, I'd say somewhere between 5.25, 5.5%, if they're out of an IRA account. If you're looking 50 years or longer, those withdrawal rates drop, but they tend to bottom out around 4.1%. That's the worst case scenario. That's the equivalent to the 4.7% for a 50-year horizon. Once again, we're not in a worst case situation for even for the FIRE folks. I think 4.5, 4.6% today should last them a very long time and shouldn't be a
Mm-hmm.
problem unless we encounter something totally unexpected.
Totally unexpected. Just to follow up on that, because we tend to have amnesia around history, and so you've lived through a lot of this history. What
Yeah.
are some times, from a financial advisor perspective, times in history that you would say were even more worst case scenario than we are today? Because a lot of people that I talk to today are like, we're in a terrible situation right now. And my clients who were buying homes in the 80s, for example, they're like, did you know what the interest rates were in the 80s? So I would love to hear your perspective as a financial advisor of what other periods would you have said were probably quote unquote more dire than it is today when it comes to financial planning?
Yeah, the 1970s was a terrible time to live through for retirees and everyone else because inflation averaged 7 or 8% during that decade, and there were a number of years where it was double digit. Well, you get double digit inflation, that's pretty scary. Things going up 10, 12, 13% a year, a couple of years in a row. All of a sudden, you're going to find yourself in a real bind. That's why I call inflation the greatest enemy of a retiree, because we don't have the ability to go out and switch jobs and get a bigger income, do things. We're stuck. I fear inflation, and I think all retirees should fear inflation above everything else.
If someone retires during a market downturn, does that change your recommendations on withdrawals?
One of the factors I use in determining what your withdrawal rate should be is how expensive stocks are, the PE ratio of the market, price to earnings ratio. And if you retire, if you're actually in the middle of a downturn, it's less damaging than if you retire just before a downturn starts, because a downturn starts, you're going to get it hit with all of it. But the garden variety bear market, when I study it, like something like 30, 35% over a couple of years is not that damaging because stock markets recover eventually. So if inflation is not a problem, I wouldn't be worried about a garden variety bear market. I'd be worried about something like 2008 when you're down almost 60%. And that can last a long time, take a long time to come back. Or even the Great Depression took the stock market 25 years to get back to where it was in the early 50s. But for the most part, I wouldn't worry too much about a downturn. Although, if you can work it out and delay your retirement until after the bear market is over, that's probably your best option. That'll give you the best result because then you're not spending money out of a portfolio which is shrinking. You at least retain
Mm-hmm.
what you have.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for saying that because that's one of the reasons that even for my own coaching clients that I emphasize making sure that you have a healthy contingency fund in case things like that happen so that you're not necessarily having to pull out of your investments at a inopportune time. So I love that you mentioned that. Let me ask you this because you mentioned this earlier. You talked about the FIRE movement. I consider myself to be part of the FIRE. Is the 4% rule still applicable for someone retiring in their 30s or 40s, assuming they are potentially looking at a 50-year horizon? So what would be the practical adjustment that someone in their 30s or 40s is retiring to still apply your research?
When you're dealing with a really long time horizon like that, you probably take about 1/2 to 0.6% off the withdrawal rate. So if we have the 4.7% rule, it would drop it down to 4.1%.
So I would
And
go
that,
back to the 4% rule, essentially.
yeah, exactly right. In other words, the
Yeah.
4% rule through hoops and ladders and everything else has come down to basically something that works for people taking out of an IRA account and for a very long time. That's although in today's environment, once again, I'd probably take probably more than that. I recommend somewhere around, oh, maybe 5.25, something like that, because we're not in that dire situation that we have. We're in a better situation, at least for now, it appears to be.
Okay. Another question that I often get is the role of annuities or pensions. Social Security is a hot topic right now. So, what role do those mechanisms play in how someone should think about applying the 4% rule today? If I have Social Security, like how does that factor into 4% rule?
I don't know if you remember that scene in the movie The Fugitive where Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones were at the top of a dam. And Tommy Lee Jones has chased Harrison Ford all the way up, and Harrison Ford's about to jump, but first he's got a gun on Tommy Lee Jones. And he's just saying, "I didn't kill my wife." And Tommy Lee Jones raises his hand and says, "I don't care." And the reason why he doesn't care, of course, it's not his job to decide whether this man is guilty or innocent. It's his job to bring him into justice. My job, self-defined over the years, has been trying to define what is the maximum amount can you take out of your investments during retirement. And I don't look at any of the other source of income, so it's Social Security or annuities or pensions. Although in a total retirement plan, they're very important because they're related to your spending. My focus and about all the questions I can really answer are what is the maximum you can take out of your account without experiencing too much risk? So my answer to that is Social Security, annuity, and pensions are very important, but they don't affect the 4% rule because it doesn't take into account other sources of income at all. They're additional on top of what you get out of your portfolio.
This is the way that I've interpreted it. What I have done for my clients is basically say, let's go for the 4% rule. I'll take a real life example from my own personal life. My parents in law, they just retired recently and they're always worried about running out of money. And I've run
Mhm.
some of the numbers and it doesn't seem like they would run out of money for 30 years, let alone they're already in their 70s. And so the way that I've tried to explain it to them as people who are not very savvy in finances is to say, even if you ran out of the money in your investments, like you have your social security to fall back on right now. And so even if we did the 4% rule, like you said, that it only takes into account for your investments, I look at the social security as icing on the cake here. Like it's more buffer because you've only accounted for the investments. What's the maximum you can take out for your investments? So anything that you have additional income on top of those investments is more safety.
Mhm. Yeah, what I look at as only part of a retirement plan is that you look at all those sources of income and take them into account. Particularly important with respect to investments, if you're planning for to live another 20, 25 years, don't plan for 20, 25 years. Plan for 30, 35, 40. Give yourself some margin of error so that if you live a lot longer than you think you're going to, you're not going to be in trouble. That's really important. Just like an engineer designs a bridge, they always design them so that they can handle 3, 4, 5 times the load that they expect them to have them day to day. Just so if something unexpected happens, you don't have a disaster.
Thank you. That a slightly more aggressive portfolio may allow for higher withdrawal rates. So
Mhm.
is there an allocation that you think works better today in like today's environment?
If you take a look at, let's say, the worst case scenario, and you're using a portfolio of 60% stock, 40% bonds, there's actually a range between like 45% stocks and about 75% stocks where you would get the same 4.7%. If you want to be
Hmm.
more aggressive, if you want to go to the higher end, the problem with getting very high stock percentages is that if you run into a really bad stock bear market, it'll devastate your portfolio. And if you don't have enough stocks in there, you don't have enough return for you to get the high withdrawal rate. So stock allocation is a difficult subject. I put quite a bit of space in it to my book, but in general, if you if you feel you can handle it, if you are in retirement and a bear market ends and a new bull market starts, because they always follow, I think you can be more aggressive. If you know you're in the early stages of a bull market, take it up to 75%, maybe a little bit more, and then maybe gradually reduce it over time as the bull market matures. That'll should give you higher returns without risk. But my feeling is that one of the safest investments in the world is cheap stocks because they almost always go up. The problem is we haven't had cheap stocks for a long time. It's
Yeah, that's right.
2009 was the last time we had something that could be considered cheap. And many years before that, we back to cheap again. So, yeah, I mean, you can play games with the asset allocation. You can get more aggressive, but I think get aggressive when the circumstances are right. I used to be a buy and hold investor. I'm not a buy and hold investor more. As a retiree, I don't think buy and hold is the best way because you just let your portfolio sit there in a 2008 market and watch it get devastated. It's very disconcerting to see all that money being lost. The service I use uses risk management approach where they assess the risk in the stock market at any time and recommend adjustments, incremental adjustments to the equity, the stock allocation. So right now they're, let's say, recommending you hold a little bit more than half of what you would normally hold in stocks. If you normally hold 60% in stocks, they're recommending effectively you hold something like 32, 33, and the rest in cash because they see a lot of risk in this market, partly from valuation. Stocks are very expensive, and history shows when stocks get expensive like this, the 10 years afterwards are pretty poor for returns from stocks. You probably do better off in treasury bills. And it's a process, and I find them very helpful, and they take a lot of the emotion out of the investing.
So that leads me to how long have you been retired now?
I've been retired since 2013, so it's a dozen
Oh,
years
okay.
now.
How are you liking retirement?
Oh, I'm enjoying it. I'm not getting any younger, but retirement is great. I spend a lot of time doing my research, so it gives me a purpose, a core. I lost my first wife a couple of years ago, and I very happily remarried to a wonderful woman. She's made my life a joy, and got my grandkids, my children. I have lots of outside interests, tennis, golf, reading, all kinds of things. I never get bored.
Because one of the questions I get very often as someone who has publicly said that I plan on retiring early, the first question I always get is, what are you going to do? Aren't you going to be bored? And it sounds like you are finding plenty of ways to fill the time.
Definitely not bored. I'm always trying to learn new things, try to improve myself in some way. There's a lot of room left for improvement in my life, so it keeps me busy.
So you mentioned that you have a new book coming out. Can you tell us more about the book?
Yeah, it's called A Richer Retirement, Supercharging the 4% Rule to Spend More and Enjoy More. And basically, it takes all that I've learned over the last 30 years, including a major breakthrough I made a couple of years ago, and lays it out in a very simple cookbook fashion. So if people want
Oh,
to create their own withdrawal plan, step by step, the things you have to consider, the variables you have to look into. And in addition to any plan that you develop, whether it's a estate plan, an income tax plan, investment plan, that are supposed to last a very long time, they're going to encounter circumstances that weren't planned for. So you have to be ready to make adjustments in the plan in the middle of retirement. And I go into 5 examples of situations that can crop up and what I recommend people do. I think that's important so that they keep the plan viable. The book will be released August 5th. It's you can
oh,
take.
wow. Oh, awesome. I will definitely sign up and read about that because I'm doing a lot of research on retirement right now. So it sounds like the perfect next read for me. And you mentioned having a third party work on your investments to take the emotion out of it. And did you personally experience any emotions or fears at the point at which you were deciding to retire?
In 2008, I got my client completely out of the stock market before that terrible October, November 2008. So they didn't suffer the losses. What I didn't do as good a job in is getting them back in. You've got to be able to do both. And that's really helped me quite a bit make decisions because the stock market can be a very misleading place. It can look like it's going in one direction, gangbusters, and all of a sudden it turns around and goes the other direction. And if you're not prepared to handle those turns with equanimity, you'll wreck your retirement, guarantee.
So you said that you had taken your clients out before that big downturn. How did you know to do that?
I just a sense of what was going on. I read extensively, and I felt we were headed for a major crisis, and that was only getting worse, and that it would be devastating for stocks. It already had started to be. I think those 2 months, the market lost something like 25, 30%, which is a good chunk of what the overall loss that it sustained during that year and a half. Just got very uncomfortable the way things were going and how they were being dealt with. And it turned out it was a great decision. That service in April, near the very start of the recovery, recommended their clients move back into stocks heavily. And they were right because stocks were cheap for the first time in many years and the last time in many years. And cheap stocks are always good to be in because you have great returns likely in the years afterwards.
On that note, are there any other things that you look back on your career and you say to yourself, I wish I had done this differently?
Oh, golly, that was probably my biggest regret. I enjoyed my clients and we had such a great relationship. I really miss it.
Mhm.
Maybe I retired a little bit too soon, but
Mhm.
I found plenty of things to keep me busy. And I found another firm to acquire mine, which I researched very carefully. I'm very happy to say the clients I still keep in touch with, they're very happy there. That's probably the most important job you'll do for your clients is find them a new home once you decide to leave the profession that'll treat them as well as you did.
That must have been pretty extensive research. It's like you're giving your kids away or giving your pets. Even for myself, even though I talk about retiring early, I still feel like I'm in this world of like, there's so many clients that I genuinely enjoy working with that even when I retire early, I would still be working with them in some capacity or finding them a good home, like you said. So, what qualities were you looking for to ensure that your clients were going to be well taken care of at the next place?
I want somebody who's high integrity, somebody that had a reasonably similar philosophy that I did, in terms of financial advising and investing. I hired a third party firm to help me search, but it turned out, as it was, I ended up finding somebody in my own backyard in the San Diego area who I'd known for many years.
Hmm.
I just had no idea that they were looking to expand. And then I heard that they were looking to acquire, and I contacted them. It worked out, really well.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad that worked out. Have
Yes.
you personally or professionally found any other investments outside of the stock market that you found interesting or personally felt was worth investing in?
No, I'm pretty much a stock guy. There are some folks who spend a lot of time with real estate and very successful. That's not me. That's not my cup of tea. I like investments that I can buy and sell if I become unhappy with them with a minimum of hassle and don't require a lot of maintenance like real estate does. Some people have made a lot of money with real estate, so that's not a criticism. It's just a personal preference.
We like to have the ending kind of wrap up what we've talked about today. So, if you were to explain the 2025 version of the 4% rule, how would you explain that in just a couple of sentences?
For a person who is planning on 30-year retirement and withdrawing from an IRA account or something similar, that the worst case scenario would be 4.7%. Okay. Now, I compare that to the average for the last 100 years is over 7%. Believe it or not, the average in a retiree is able to take 7%. They haven't been able to do that except for a few months in the last 25, 30 years because the stock market's been so expensive. But that would be it. And it would be a rule I would use very carefully because I don't think the historical circumstances that generated that rule apply to today. We're not as in dire a situation. And just hope we don't get a return to inflation. I'm still continue to be worried about inflation. Keep an eye on the inflation and take out more than the 4.7%, maybe five and a quarter, maybe five and a half, and hope for better times.
Is there an inflation number that starts to cause a red alarm for people?
I think once you get above 5% persistently, you're starting to run into it really uncomfortable.
Awesome. I have so thoroughly enjoyed this interview. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Any of your future endeavors?
In fact, I'll soon be opening up a website that's designed to
Hmm.
complement the book. The book has about 130 charts, but they're all in black and white. So I plan to have all those charts in color on the website and also offer people an opportunity if they want to ask me questions, they can do. Keep up with my new research. I'll be posting it there. Just a lot of stuff about me and what I'm doing, which hopefully will be of interest to people and help them get the most out of the book itself.
I will absolutely include that. And I'm just so grateful for you today, Bill. Thanks so much for taking time with me.
It's been a delight, and I wish you the best of luck with your fire. It's an
Oh,
intriguing approach to life.
my husband and I, we are navigating it one day at a time. We recently
Yeah,
just downsized so that we could do more of the traveling. And I will reiterate again that your research, I really nerded out on it and deep dived into it. And it really changed my habits and my view around retirement such that I could explore doing this earlier in my career. You've changed my life and you're changing many other people's lives. And I am super grateful for not just your research, but also your generosity of time. So thank you.
my pleasure. Enjoyed it.